Witch's Wardrobe, Chapter 6. And before I read, I have a few words to preview with you. Okay. So first, we'll do the ones with pictures. We have a robin, and you'll come across in the chapter, it says the robin alighted, and alighted just means landed on a branch. Another word you're going to hear, which is normal in Britain, but not so normal here, is the word larder, and it's what we would call a pantry. So a room where your family keeps all your like canned foods, maybe your cereal, some flour, oats, whatever, foods that don't need to be refrigerated. Okay, so kind of like a closet or a special shelf for that is called a larder. And then to address this text box over here that's green, in one part, Edmund says, "I'll pay you out." And that's not a phrase we use very much in American English. But basically, it means he wants to get back at Peter and the rest of the children. They point out his error, which you'll find out what I mean by that as you read. And then he also calls them prigs, which is an insult. And it means someone who acts like they're better than you. Okay, so he insults them and he says he'll pay you out, which is like we would say, "I'll get back at you," meaning he's going to do something to get back at them. So, okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to read to you. Chapter 6, Into the Forest. There are not a lot of pictures, but I'll make sure you see them if there are any. "I wish the Macready would hurry up and take all these people away," said Susan presently. "I'm getting horribly cramped." Now, if you remember last chapter, Mrs. Macready was taking tourists around the mansion, and they had to hide in the wardrobe to get away from her. Okay. "And what a filthy smell of camphor," said Edmund. "I expect these pockets of coats are full of mothballs," said Susan, "to keep away the moths." "There's something sticking into my back," said Peter. "And isn't it cold?" said Susan. "Now that you mention it, it is cold," said Peter. "Hang it all, it's wet too." "What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet, and it's getting wetter every minute." He struggled to his feet. "Let's get out," said Edmund. "They've gone." "Ooh," said Susan suddenly. Everyone asked her what was the matter. "I'm sitting against a tree," said Susan. "And look, it's getting light over there." "By Jove, you're right," said Peter. "And look, there and there. It's trees all around. And this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've got into Lucy's wood after all." And now there was no mistaking it. All 4 children stood blinking in the daylight of a winter day. Behind them were coats hanging on pegs. In front of them were snow-covered trees. Peter turned at once to Lucy. "I apologize for not believing you," he said. "I'm sorry. Will you shake hands?" "Of course," said Lucy, and did. "And now," said Susan, "what do we do next?" "Do?" said Peter. "Why, we go explore the wood, of course." "Ah," said Susan, stamping her feet, "it's pretty cold. What about putting on some of these coats?" "They're not ours," said Peter doubtfully. "I'm sure nobody would mind," said Susan. "It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't even take them out of the wardrobe." "I never thought of that, Sue," said Peter. "Of course, now you put it that way, I see. No one could say you had bagged a coat or stolen a coat, as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it. And I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe." They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so they came down to their heels and looked more like royal robes than coats when they had put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the others looked better in their new get-ups, more suitable to the landscape. "We can pretend we're Arctic explorers," said Lucy. "This is going to be exciting enough without pretending," said Peter, and he began leading the way into the forest. There were heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if there might be more snow before night. "I say," said Edmund presently, "oughtn't we be bearing a bit more to the left? That is, if we're aiming for the lamppost. He had forgotten for the moment that he must pretend to have never been in the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. So you remember in the last chapter, Edmund pretended that Lucy was just making it up, and he pretended he'd never been here. So now he said something that shows he has been here, and he's caught in his lie. So everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him, and Peter whistled. So you really were here, he said. That time Lou said she'd met you in here, and you made out that she was telling lies. There was a dead silence. Well, of all the poisonous little beasts, said Peter, and shrugged his shoulders and said no more. There seemed indeed to be no more to say, and presently the four resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, I'll pay you all out for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs. Where are we going anyway? Said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. I think Lou ought to be the leader, said Peter. Goodness knows she deserves it. Where will you take us, Lou? What about going to see Mr. Tumnus? Said Lucy. He's the nice fawn I told you about. Everyone agreed to this, and off they went, walking briskly and stamping their feet. Lucy proved a good leader. At first she wondered whether she would be able to find the way, but she recognized an odd-looking tree in one place and a stump in another, and brought them to where the ground became uneven, into the little valley, and at last to the very door of Mr. Tumnus's cave. But there a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges and broken to bits. Inside, the cave was dark and cold and had the damp feel and smell of a place that had not been lived in for several days. Snow had drifted in from the door and was heaped on the floor, mixing with something black, which turned out to be charred sticks and ashes from the fire. Someone had apparently flung it about the room and stamped it out. The crockery lay smashed on the floor, and the picture of the fawn's father had been slashed to shreds with a knife. This is a pretty good washout, said Edmund. Not much good coming here. Okay, there's a picture of the fawn's cave, so there you go. What's this? Said Peter, stooping down. He had just noticed a piece of paper which had been nailed through the carpet to the door. Is there anything written on it? Asked Susan. Yes, I think there is, said Peter, but I can't read it in this light. Let's get out into the open air. They all went out into the daylight and crowded round Peter as he read the following words. The former occupant of these premises, the fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and awaiting trial on charge of high treason against Her Imperial Majesty, Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chatelaine of Cair Paravel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc. Also of comforting Her Majesty's said enemies, harboring spies, and fraternizing with humans. Signed, Marugrim, Captain of the Secret Police. Long live the Queen. Now, one of the phrases in there is fraternizing with humans, which I did not explain. Fraternizing means spending time with, usually like hanging out. So he's arrested because he's been spending time with humans, and that's illegal for this Queen Jadis, Queen of Narnia. The children stared at each other. I don't know if I'm going to like this place, said Susan. Who is this Queen, Lou? Said Peter. Do you know anything about her? She isn't a real queen at all, answered Lucy. She's a horrible witch, the White Witch. Everyone, all the wood people hate her. She was made an enchantment over the whole country, so that it is always winter here, but never Christmas. I wonder if there's any point in going on, said Susan. I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks as if it won't be much fun either. And it's getting colder every minute, and we've brought nothing to eat. What about just going home? Oh, but we can't, said Lucy. Suddenly, don't you see? We can't just go home, not after this. It's all on my account that the poor fawn has got into trouble. He hid me from the witch and showed me the way back. And that's what it means by comforting the queen's enemies and fraternizing with humans. We must simply try to rescue him. A lot we could do, said Edmund, when we haven't got anything to eat. Shut up, you, said Peter, who was still very angry at Edmund. What do you think, Susan? I have this horrid feeling that Lou is right, said Susan, and I don't want to go a step further, and I wish we'd never come. But I think we must try to do something for Mr. whatever his name is. I mean, the fawn. That's what I feel too, said Peter. I'm worried about having no food with us. I'd vote for going back and getting something from the larder. Only there doesn't seem to be any certainty of getting into this country again once you've got out of it. I think we'll have to go on. So do I, said both girls. If only we knew where the poor chap was in prison, said Peter. They were all still wondering what to do next when Lucy said, Look, there's a robin with such a red breast. It's the first bird I've seen in here, I say. I wonder, can birds talk in Narnia? It almost looks as if it wanted to say something to us. Then she turned to the robin and said, Please, can you tell us where Tumnus the fawn has been taken to? As she said this, she took a step forward toward the bird. It at once flew away, but only as far as to the next tree. There, it perched and looked at them very hard, as if it understood what they had been saying. Almost without noticing that they had done so, the four children went a step or two nearer it. At this, the robin flew away again to the next tree, and once more looked at them very hard. You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye. Do you know, said Lucy, I really believe he means us to follow him. I've an idea he does, said Susan. What do you think, Peter? Well, we might as well try it, answered Peter. The robin appeared to understand the matter thoroughly. It kept going from tree to tree, always a few yards ahead of them, but always so near that they could easily follow it. In this way, it led them on a slightly downhill. Wherever the robin alighted, a little shower of snow would fall off the branch. Presently, the clouds parted overhead, and the winter sun came out. And the snow all around them grew dazzlingly bright. They had been traveling in this way for about half an hour, with the two girls in front, when Edmund said to Peter, If you're not still too high and mighty to talk to me, I've got something to say which you better listen to. What is it? Said Peter. Hush, not so loud, said Edmund. There's no good frightening the girls. But have you realized what we're doing? What? Said Peter, lowering his voice to a whisper. We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side this bird is on? And why shouldn't it be leading us into a trap? That's a nasty idea. Still, a robin, you know, they're good birds in all the stories I've read. I'm sure a robin wouldn't be on the wrong side. If it comes to that, said Edmund, which is the right side? How do we know the fawns are in the right? And the queen, yes, I know we've been told she's a witch. How do we know she's in the wrong? We don't really know anything about either. The fawn saved Lucy. He said he did. But how do we know? And there's another thing, too. Has anyone the least idea of the way to get home from here? Great Scott, said Peter. I hadn't thought of that. And no chance of dinner either, said Edmund. And that's the end of chapter 6. There is one more picture of the robin leading them. Let me see. Oh, there you go. Okay. I want you to ask yourself, why do you think Edmund is having this private conversation with Peter? Why do you think he's questioning the goodness of the fawn? And why does he say, for example, if it comes to that, which is the right side? That's one of the things Edmund says. Why do you think he says that? Maybe talk about that with your family. Okay, see you for chapter 7.